Sound of Money with Santosh Sirur.
Hello and welcome to another season 3 episode of The Sound of Money. What makes it absolutely exciting, interesting, and really, to be honest, a very good friendly chat is I'm going to talk to someone who, is a friend more than a guest today because I started off virtually my FM career with him all along, listening to what, and I was always interested in television in those days and even today. But no, it's an absolute pleasure to have my guest, Vikram Oza, on this podcast. So, Vikram, of course, now is a consulting anchor with NDTV. And of course, he's worked with a couple of big stream, mainstream media, including ET Now, BTVI, Bloomberg News Television India, and of course, Times Now, which is where we've been seeing him anchoring the 9 p.m. news. Hi, Vikram, and welcome to The Sound of Money.
Thank you so much for having me, Santosh. Talking to you takes me back in time, those FM days with All India Radio. Heady days, really. What fun.
Absolutely. And I can't imagine, we're actually meeting on a podcast years later. Awesome.
Who would have thought?
Absolutely. So, Vikram, even before we get into your television journey, I'd like to take you back to, the Wednesday mailbox is where you were known for with FM All India Radio.
Yes.
That's where you kind of got the initial hints about what a career is. And I recall you were also doing television, the Amul India show, as I recall.
Correct.
From radio to what you're doing as television, how has been this journey?
The journey has been transformative, to say the least. Stellar in parts and, a huge learning curve. Because when you tread different media, Santosh, you realize how each medium offers a different kind of platform.
Yeah.
So while the basic concept of communication remains the same, where you're connecting with a large audience, you are indeed broadcasting, but the way in which you interact, the kind of language that you use, the way there are certain nuances in the way that you would talk, perhaps, all of that changes so drastically sometimes. So in that sense, that journey has been a huge learning curve. And I like the idea of going in and out of different media, even in a present time, so that, you kind of keep abreast of what each platform can offer by way of communicating with various kinds of audiences at different times of the day as well. Because Wednesday mailbox, like you said, was playing out in the night.
Yeah.
And that kind of, sometimes you're doing that husky tone and you're kind of connecting with those people who are listening at that time of the night. You hear a little bit of that even on FM channels now. Not a little, actually a lot, because you know the direction in which they've gone. But All India Radio had its own restrictions and we did it our way.
Absolutely. In fact, managing from a spool tape to then on to the CDs and now to digital, I'm sure that whole journey transcended on a different level, right? But when it comes to television journalism, and now that you've been in there, done that kind of thing, there's always this perception that it's so glamorous, but there's a lot of hard work and effort. I want you to talk to the other side of the story, because as listeners, as viewers, as audiences, youngsters especially watching this podcast think it's an absolute glamour job, but it's not the case, right? So what really goes into it? Probably a little more granular. Is it really aspirational? Yes, definitely. But is that perception a little high on the other side? I don't think so, right?
So having done this journey that you talked about, it wasn't like I jumped in front of the camera. It took a while before I actually got there. And I was doing a lot of production work, whether it was radio as well. You'd recall that we do radio documentaries at All India Radio. So even while it's our voice that's going out, and we were doing documentaries on various subjects, like I was doing one on English theater at that time, but the hard work was all in putting it together.
Yeah.
So we were dealing with spools. So it was all about going out, getting all the material, and putting it all in context, writing a script, getting people in as well, different voices. It was all you.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to say that has really helped, Santosh, because now, after having done television in a way where you have a lot of resources, we've gone through that entire phase. Now we are back to that singularity when you're trying to get all the news in. The digital aspect of it makes you have to do everything on your own. Completely. So you are a producer yourself. You're not just the face, you're not just the glamorous aspect. A lot of it, all that research that you have to do, you have to take your phone. Yes, it makes, technology makes so much life so much easier.
Yeah.
But you have to do it all yourself. and there is a restriction of time because you've got to be the first one to put it out.
Absolutely.
So all of that put in a nutshell, the glamour side, of course, it hasn't really worn off, but there is a lot of hard work. Technology makes it easier, but I think there is that much more to do by way of creating content and putting it out there. You should know, Santosh, you've been doing this, and
True.
I don't know how you do this balancing act of yours, being a banker and a podcaster. I think it's tough.
I always say, banking, the radio actually taught me in banking a very, very important lesson, be cool on the hot seat. Because, right, All India Radio, we had to manage the announcements, the news, the advertisements, everything, the phone calls. Same time in banking, same thing, right? Customer calls, firefighting some issue, meetings, conference calls. I think that's what radio really taught me a lot, So,
I learned that from you, Santosh, because being cool in the hot seat, not just looking glamorous, not just sounding your part, you have to be cool in the hot seat because you are live. The number of times people turn around and ask me, you're live in the sense that you're talking while I'm watching you? They still can't wrap their head around it.
Correct.
But it's actually as live as you see it.
Absolutely.
You take like not even a minute's delay. I said only as much as it takes to beam it up to a satellite and down to your TV set. That's about the only delay that there is. But other than that, it's as live as you see it. So
Absolutely.
that creates the heat of the seat is in the live element of it. It gives you a high, but it also kind of keeps you on your toes.
True. Absolutely. Vikram, there's this other piece about staying relevant, right, in the kind of journalism that be it lifestyle, be it business or news journalism in general. I think it's all about, the long-term sustainability of the media, because today, your cell phone itself, anyone can become a journalist with Twitter and with any kind of social media. And more so, I'm talking about X, because that's where you report something or quote unquote report, even though you may not even have a reporting or a journalism background, but you create the news. For example, take the Air India crash. There's this kid who happened to be on a terrace, clicks it, and the whole world, including Boeing, is going to use that piece of news to actually investigate probably what happened. Yes. So how has that news evolved, and what's the kind of chatter in the newsrooms as you guys go on air always?
So the good side of it, as I see it as a traditional journalist, is that we have that many more sources to dip into. Yeah. Because as much as you would like to use the word journalist, the context isn't there. When someone who is not looking at journalism, not practicing journalism in that traditional sense, just like you mentioned, just happen to be there, shooting the video, and has this platform to put it on as well.
True.
That I'm not sure qualifies that person as a journalist. The journalist is the one who has the context, who's able to connect the dots. And if you don't have that, and if you aren't able to put things in context, you have to leave it like you do in the world of finance as well, Santosh. You would have to go to a financial planner. Yes, you're watching the markets. Yes, you know which stocks are doing well. You know which mutual funds are giving you the kind of returns that you'd hope for.
Yeah.
But it is a financial planner, an expert that you go to kind of ensure that your portfolio is aligned with what your goals in life are. Similarly, in journalism as well, when it comes to real reporting, you need to ensure that you've got those basic pieces of journalism in place, the what, why, where, how, all of that is covered nicely. Now, if that doesn't happen, then a lot of misinformation goes out. And that is the fear, right? For us as journalists, like I said, this does mean that we have so many more sources to dip into. Yeah. But it also means that we have to do our bit to cut through the clutter to ensure that the real information goes out in a way. So sometimes we are holding back. I've been in news organizations, Santosh, where we haven't put out, like at the time when Mumbai was attacked by terrorists, we were holding back on information until we had confirmation from our reporters.
Yeah.
Being sensational to be able to get that many more viewers, to get that many more hits, is not something that drives real journalism.
True.
And that's something that we need to be wary about. So it poses its opportunities and its challenges.
Absolutely. You bring up a very important point, Vikram. So can I safely say, instead of saying content is king, is it context which is king? Is that true?
Well, content is as big a king as it always was, if it hasn't become bigger. But context is definitely rising in that scale because there is so much content out there. How do you separate the wheat from the chaff?
Yeah.
And that is the biggest challenge today.
Yeah.
When you have content hitting you from all sides,
Yeah.
it is a king and it is getting that kind of exposure that was due to content. But now we've got to ensure that from all that content, especially when it comes to journalism, how do you separate the wheat from the chaff?
Absolutely. So the other thing when it comes to television journalism, and thanks to CNN 1991, where all this quote unquote breaking news is when it started. But today, when you watch television, it's like literally everything is breaking news, right? Anything literally under the sun. So isn't there that within the newsrooms, there is that kind of a fatigue, right? Or why is this? And news, when you watch news today in some channels, it's a lot more noise. Whilst there may be underlying content from the anchor standpoint, there's a lot of noise. There are these 10, 15 windows. You don't even know who's talking at one point in time. Even they themselves don't know whom they are listening to. At one point in time, that may be sounding quote unquote exciting, right? But it is not. And then when you go back to your good old Doordarshan, which also seems to be going in that direction, I don't know, but somewhere there is news about that. Uh, have we lost kind of excitement about news in that sense, or where do you see the media heading in that context?
I still think we're in a phase where we are overly excited by news. Hence, we are seeing so much breaking news. We are here. There is so much noise around news as well.
Yeah,
It seems like we want to draw the audience's attention to say that watch us because
yeah,
we got the news and we are decoding it. But there is so much more emphasis on putting an opinion out, which is very unlike what we used to have in days of yore, with Doordarshan being
yeah,
the only news provider, because the context was something that perhaps they would give in small measure, but the opinion was never ever put out in that kind of news reading. It was actually called news reading.
yeah,
So we weren't so much of the anchors that we are today.
yeah.
There is a lot more noise than there ever was on news television. But I have a feeling it is only because, like I said, there is so much content. We want to be able to draw attention. And the only way it seems people understand drawing attention is by making a lot of noise. Because typically, if you go down the streets as well, the
Yeah.
moment you see a hullabaloo, you will stop and look and wonder what's going on. It will draw attention. It's the way I think Indian culture has been. So to be able to dip into that and get into that audience psyche and use that to be able to garner that much more viewership, I think is the route that many organizations have taken. But I don't know if it will sustain. Now we'll need to rethink because I don't think it's going to sustain too long. You will need to get back to basics. You'll need to slow it down. You'll need to put out the news first.
True.
In all the noise, sometimes the basic news,
Yeah.
an audience member often asks me, like, what is the news? What are they discussing? Even that seems to be lost to people.
Yeah.
How are you going to be able to connect with an audience that doesn't even follow what opinion you're putting out there because the basic news is not
Itself is missing. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that the "Kehna Kya Chahte Ho" moment is finally arrived in news media, hopefully, and there's a bit of introspection within the editorial teams. So, Vikram, the other thing when it comes to news television, and for an avid listener audiences, it's also the brand of the news anchor that sometimes at times is even larger than the media company itself. So the personal branding that's happening, I know it's pretty of a tightrope between your visibility and the credibility. How does one balance that amongst the fraternity that you've been dealing with and talking to?
Again, this ties into the kind of need to draw attention, right? So unless you build these larger than life personalities, which is again, I think, a page that we've taken from the world of entertainment. To create that kind of credibility, you have to create that persona.
Yeah.
So I often marvel at a lot of these headshots of anchors who have this static pose, right?
Yeah.
Be able to kind of draw that personality of credibility.
Yeah.
It's an important piece for journalism. Now, how you're using that, I think, is getting more and more stale. So social media now is creating personalities that are that much more affable.
True.
I feel that we are passing through this phase. This personality phase, of course, has been there. But I think, again, we're going to go back to the basics. where you need that kind of connection. If I'm able to put news in context for you, I'm able to do it in a style that is friendly, that is for you as an audience to understand easily. I think there is a better chance of me making a connection with you because I'm using some of that, I don't know, for lack of a better word, that influencer personality as well, is what perhaps an anchor today needs rather
Yeah,
than being larger than life and being that much more distant from the audience. So,
absolutely.
if I have someone friendlier sitting behind a news desk and sharing the news with me, I find that much more watchable.
So how much is the focus on empathy or like ethics in storytelling, especially when it comes to news journalism? And I'm specific reference to Indian television, right? It's so important, right? Because sometimes this journalism kind of really reduces itself to performance. Like just to give you a couple of examples, like for example, the recent Charlie Kirk story. There's
Yes,
so much of politics behind, but the underlying is there is his wife and a 3-year-old who are really suffering, and that
right.
news is brought in a the storytelling or the empathy aspect of seems to be somewhere in the back burner.
You think empathy is missing, but if you see a lot of the posts on social media, they're
Hmm.
bringing that in. So, like I mentioned, every platform lends itself to the kind of posturing of news, as it were. So, if you look at social media, you will find that empathy element. But of
Yeah.
course, it's not journalism. For
Hmm.
me, the news element of Mr. Kirk was the fact that he was shot, and we did not have context to who he was, what he had done.
Yeah.
And that's where news needed to come in to kind
Hmm.
of say why this is an
Absolutely.
important development as far as US politics goes. And that's where it should have begun, and that's where it should have ended.
True.
But the empathy part of it, I think, is not really required in journalism as far as today's context is concerned. Again, when we are talking about going back to the basics, I think there is another scope, another space for that kind of element, the backstories, etc. That can always be watched on a social media platform. And I
Yeah.
think that's ideal as well. So if we have that kind of demarcation, even when we're putting out content today, Santosh, even when you're putting out this podcast, for example, there will be certain elements you will put out in a certain way. A certain part will go out on X in a certain way, on Instagram in a certain way, on LinkedIn in a certain way,
Yeah.
because we know those platforms cater to a certain audience or even the same audience, but come to that platform with a different expectation.
Yeah.
And that's
True.
what, as content creators, we need to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. So let's come to the, the career aspects of journalism, because of course today you have a lot of these quote unquote journalists sitting in other parts of the world talking about India, or for that matter, anywhere creating reels. But serious journalism is, if someone has to pursue in today's context, what's the kind of skill set it's required? And is there a scope from a journalistic, and I'm talking more specifically into media, television journalism, because that's where you've been most part of your life. What's the kind of scope for youngsters?
The scope for youngsters is just too humongous. But the most important element that I find missing today in those aspiring for a career in journalism is patience. Because, yes, you're drawn to the glamorous aspect of being in front of a camera and delivering the 9 o'clock news. Yes, it's extremely aspirational. And I'm grateful that that charm hasn't worn off.
Yeah,
But at the end of the day, you enter journalism for the basic things that I started out with,
true.
which is to be able to collect the news, give it context, and communicate it in a style that your audience, the way you understand your audience, is able to comprehend in an easy fashion. That commitment is the most important thing, to
Hmm.
be able to stay on course without getting distracted by various social media needs, doing 20 other things at the same time, the need to be the first to put out the news. All of that needs to take a backseat.
Yeah,
Yes, there will be pressures on the job, but if you need to stay on course and have a long career in journalism, there is enough scope for you to enter the field, be a reporter, do your research, be on a ticker team. Ticker is where the news goes out first. So
yeah,
you're the actual first gatekeeper of what goes out as news. I'm talking about a television news channel.
yeah.
So you start from that level. You understand what makes news. You give
Hmm.
it context as well. You understand where the news has emanated from.
Yeah.
What are the origins of it? You break it down on a regular basis. That's when you start your journey as a journalist. That requires a lot of patience before you make that entire journey towards being a TV anchor who can regularly every night put all the news in context for you without having to always delve in. Because Santosh, you have to understand when there is breaking news, the kind that sometimes you watch, you don't have access to immediate information. Yes, you're tapping away on your laptop and a lot of information is available over there. But imagine me having to balance out what is happening in an EP, right? A earpiece where I'm getting a lot of instructions on how much time I've got, directors telling me what to do, what not to do next. I have limited information, but I can't pull out information that is on another platform. I have to ensure that my reporters of my channel are confirming the news. So even if it's just 2 lines, that's all I have by way of information, even if I don't know more. At that point in time, my news sense, my research of many years, that's what I will dip into to start giving context to the development that has happened.
True.
Rather than making up news as I go along.
Yes.
Right?
The making up news is something which is scary.
Sources that are not credible.
Absolutely. So apart from patience for this Insta generation as we have, right? What are the kind of skill sets, educational qualifications, et cetera, that you think probably form the base foundations?
So a lot has changed, Santosh, since we've been in journalism. At that point in time, there weren't as many degree courses that were available, and we made our own way. I, for one, did my graduation in economics, and then I moved on to doing a film and video production course in at Xavier's in Mumbai. And from that point onwards, I started doing a lot of work. Whether it
been
was,
on the ground, actually.
Yes, in print, in radio, in television. I was doing a lot of work before I decided to do a master's in journalism studies in Cardiff University. So that kind of trajectory I felt when you spend some time in working on ground, you develop your interest areas. And that's when you realize that, yes, business is something that I'm drawn to. Documentary filmmaking is something else that I'm interested in, or general news or politics is something that, so there are so many fields that you can choose from, but unless you actually get in and start doing it, you will not know where you want to specialize. So now that you have degree courses, you need to kind of start from that very basic point. Start working for a bit, start working and interning. Even if you don't get paid, it should be fine as long as you get the experience. Decide which area of the news gathering process you're most interested in, and then dip into doing it at a degree level, at a postgraduate level.
One or two questions, very generic, before I let you go. You have been into business journalism over the years. Where you see the India story moving, from a television lens, you get to see on and even listen to some of the most respected people from the business leaders, right? Where do you see the India story moving ahead? Is that Viksit Bharat true in its truest form?
It's true in its absolute truest form, I should say, Santosh, because the growth potential, I think, irrespective of the kind of policy reforms, they will all help. But a lot of people will tell you that, it is only if we have this, and this by way of policy reforms that we will be able to get there. I say it will determine the time frame in which we're able to become the Viksit Bharat. But that journey of ours remains unmitigated. The fact that we are getting there, the markets are reflecting it. That positivity may slow down, but it is never going to stop, is my sense. The kind of growth paths that we've taken, when you look at other developing economies as well, we are unstoppable at this stage. So there's no taking away from the fact that we are getting there and quickly at that, and policy reforms are only going to help.
True. Absolutely. On that very, very optimistic, positive note, Vikram, thank you so much for joining in on my podcast. It's so awesome. It's as good as we in the next studio on All India Radio years back, but now this is a screen ahead of us. Thank you so much for being on the Sound of Money.
Such a pleasure being with you on Sound of Money, Santosh, and great luck on this podcast. I know it's doing fabulously well. Wish you great luck for it.
Thank you so much. You're going to be on my 90th or the 91st episode of the podcast. So looking forward that a big 100 coming soon.
Looking forward. All the best for it. I'm going to be watching.
Absolutely. Thank you. And yes, with that, we come to the end of this episode of Sound of Money with me, Santosh Sirur, and my guest, Vikram Oza. Thank you for watching and being with us. Bye-bye and take care.